Commodore, my 64, my Commodore 64.
The robot crew of a galactic space freighter has turned against its masters. To counter the uprising, a droid-influenced device is beamed aboard, remotely controlled by you. Your mission? Regain control of the ship by destroying or overtaking every hostile robot on board. Succeed and order is restored. Fail? Well, we've all seen Terminator.
I'll be back.
This is Paradroid, the 1985 Commodore 64 classic where you'll face off against an army of rebellious machines, explore more than 400 screens across 20 ship decks, and race against the clock to solve tricky logic puzzles. So pour yourself a glass of Tang, strap on that interface helmet, and prepare to jack into one of the most original, clever, and flat-out brilliant games ever made for the Commodore 64. The story of Paradroid begins in England in the early 80s, and its history is almost as epic as playing the game itself. Fresh off developing the well-regarded Gribbly's Day Out for Hewson Consultants, 25-year-old game designer Andrew Braybrook was handed a new project. The core concept was only roughly sketched out, but it had potential. Take control of a droid-influenced device and work your way up a ladder of increasingly sophisticated robots. Braybrook tackled the project not as a Hewson employee, but as part of the independent Essex-based company Graphgold, alongside his friend and boss Steve Turner. He drew on past experiences for inspiration. One was Survive, a multiplayer game he'd developed for an IBM VM370 while working at the defense company GEC Marconi. In Survive, up to 6 players competed simultaneously, but you could never be sure where your opponents were until they suddenly appeared in view. That uncertainty, the constant fear of an unexpected encounter, was exactly the kind of tension Braybrook wanted to capture in Paradroid. Scrolling levels were inspired by Avalon, a ZX Spectrum game by Steve Turner, who also served as a constant sounding board and technical collaborator throughout Paradroid's development. Other influences ranged from the arcade classic Frontline, which inspired the droid swapping mechanic, to the terrifying corridors of Alien, and even Black Sabbath's album cover for Technical Ecstasy played a part. And here's where it gets really fun. ZZAP 64, the influential British computer magazine, asked Braybrook to keep a daily diary of his progress, which they later published as a series of articles. The diary gives a rare, often humorous glimpse into how a game was made in the mid-80s. Development officially kicked off in May 1985 and wrapped up in early August, just 3 months for a complex, multi-deck, 400-screen game. By comparison, today's AAA titles take years, hundreds of developers, and have budgets large enough to fund a small space program. Braybrook's diary is a masterclass in squeezing the 64 for all it was worth. On May 20th, he celebrated fitting 3 numeric counts into a single byte. On June 17th, he discussed using bank switching to trick the 64 into providing more RAM than it actually had. And on July 16th, Braybrook was feeling happy about squeezing all the deck plans into 40 bytes. Modern developers, take note. That kind of micromanagement is now purely nostalgic and optional. The diary also shows how iterative game design really is. Graphics and color schemes were constantly reworked, robot behaviors evolved, and experimentation led to features like ramming. On May 21st, a sudden brainstorm, and I quote, "Zap, whiz, pow," gave birth to the minigame for taking control of other robots. Within a week, one of Paradroid's most iconic mechanics was functional. Of course, not everything went as smoothly. Early in development, a power surge fried their new monitor cartridge, threatening a day's work of graphics work. Braybrook and Turner tried to recreate the spike by turning a fan heater on and off. Spoiler, it was entertaining but useless. From then on, graphics were designed on the most reliable storage medium available, paper. But it all worked out. 3 months, 850 man-hours, 300 sheets of printer paper, 15 floppy disks, and 3 Type H pencils later, Paradroid was complete and handed to Hewson. It still needed a bit of fine-tuning, but by its November 1985 release, the game was ready, and it hit the market to rave reviews and brisk sales. Graphgold's relationship with Hewson continued for a few years after Paradroid's release, resulting in classics like Uridium, Quasitron, and Ranorama. But Hewson's sales started slowing down, and Graphgold signed a deal with a new publisher, Telecomsoft, in 1987. Shortly thereafter, Telecomsoft was sold to Microprose, and Graphgold continued to develop games and produce 16-bit arcade conversions throughout the 90s, primarily for Sega consoles. But by the late 90s, now working with Virgin Interactive, they found it difficult to establish a foothold in the new era of consoles, and they finally folded in 1997. The gameplay at Paradroid can best be summed up as a shoot-'em-up with puzzle elements. You know, a thinking person's blaster. You're aboard a spaceship viewed from a top-down perspective. Each of the 20 decks is divided into rooms filled with hostile robots that patrol on fixed routes. Every robot is represented by a circle enclosing a 3-digit number that roughly indicates its power level. 001 is the weakest, 999 the strongest. Naturally, you start as a 001, the lowly influence device, and it's about as threatening as a Roomba with a laser pointer. It can fire a few shots and survive a couple of hits, but that's about it. Success depends on finding stronger robots to take over, which you do by battling them for control in Paradroid's signature feature, the transfer game. The transfer game is a fast-paced logic puzzle that's equal parts strategy and panic. You and your opponent face off on a circuit board divided into logic gates. You claim territory by activating connections, racing to control more of the board before time runs out. It's simple in concept, brutal in execution, and for many players, one of the leading causes of broken joysticks in Commodore 64 history. Once you grasp it though, it's a blast, the kind of mechanic that feels like it could easily be repackaged as a modern mobile game. There's also strategy in who you try to transfer into. The higher the difference between your droid's number and your opponent's, the harder the minigame becomes. A much stronger robot gets more moves, giving it a huge advantage. Personally, I try not to punch above my weight by more than 200 points. And to make things even more interesting, not every high-numbered droid is automatically better. Paradroid features 24 distinct robot types, from humble cleaners to menacing battle units. Some are armed to the teeth, others rely on disruptor pulses or heavy armor, and a few are basically roving tin cans waiting to be recycled. The best robot is the one suited to your current situation, and if you need intel, you can always check a console for details. But even capturing the mighty 999 droid isn't a guaranteed ticket for success. Every robot is unstable and will eventually self-destruct after being captured. The more powerful the droid, the shorter its lifespan. Roughly 40 seconds for a 999 versus around 5 minutes for your starting unit. That's right, ultimate power comes with the battery life of a gaming laptop. So choosing when to upgrade becomes a real dilemma. Go for the big guns and you might burn out before clearing the deck. Stick with the weaker droid and you're only one hit away from becoming space debris. Speaking of being hit, damage in Paradroid is subtle. There's no health bar. You have to go by instinct and visual cues, like your robot flashing. Recharge stations can heal you, but they'll cost you precious points. All these systems combine to keep you on edge without ever feeling unfair. Every decision, shoot, transfer, or flee, carries risk and reward. It's truly brilliant game design and it feels perfectly balanced. Throw in the fast, silky smooth arcade action, and what results is as close to arcade perfection as you'll find on the 64. And that flow never really stops. Every cleared deck brings a small moment of triumph. The lights power down, the tension fades, before you hop into that lift and tackle the next one. Clear all 20 and the game offers a quick congratulations, a 2,000 point bonus, and then dumps you right back into the chaos. But that's how we liked it. Like most games of its era, Paradroid isn't just about beating it. It's about taking that top place on the high scoreboard and beating your friends. Andrew Braybrook spent a great deal of time perfecting the graphics for Paradroid. They went through numerous revisions before he landed on the final color schemes for each level, with their cool metallic beveled look. The ship's interiors feel futuristic, almost eerie, and they fit perfectly within the sci-fi world he created. And you can tell that Braybrook really liked his results. He borrowed heavily from this style for Iridium, his next game, and another Commodore 64 classic. The attention to detail is phenomenal. Doors smoothly open and close as you approach. Recharge stations glow enticingly. Explosions pop. And the cross-section view of the ship gives an impressive sense of depth. But the real stars of the show are the robots themselves, not the small icons you control from the top-down view. Those are neat but fairly simple. I'm talking about the large robot portraits that appear as you scroll through the console. Braybrook originally built those images by combining 8 sprites, but by the time the final version shipped, they'd been redrawn as high-resolution bitmaps, each one sketched on paper, converted to hex, and then entered by hand. The results are gorgeous, and they add substantial depth and character to Paradroid. The sound design is equally strong. Explosions, collisions, and robot interfaces each have distinctive effects that punctuate the action, and when your droid is simply roaming the empty corridors, the low mechanical hum provides the perfect ambient backdrop. In short, the audio-visual design is spot on. Together, the sights and sounds of Paradroid completely immerse you in a futuristic space freighter ruled by rogue machines. The Commodore 64 Appreciation Society absolutely adores Paradroid, and we're definitely not alone. Released to rave reviews in 1985, it was instantly recognized as a classic. The November 1985 issue of ZZAP 64 rated it 97 out of 100, calling it the classic shoot-'em-up. Commodore user gave it 21 out of 25 stars, praising it as an addictive shoot-'em-up which looks and feels superb, and Popular Computing Weekly awarded it a perfect 5 out of 5. Those high reviews endured for years. In 1993, Commodore force-ranked Paradroid as the 14th best C64 game of all time, and in a 2002 ZZAP 64 tribute publication, fans voted it the top 64 game ever. On Lemon 64, it's currently ranked 47th. It feels like a huge shame then that this masterpiece never reached North America back in its heyday. As a kid in Canada, I completely missed it. No ads, no reviews, nothing. It wasn't until the late 80s that I started hearing about it on BBS's and early Usenet. That obviously doesn't diminish its legendary status, but it does make me a bit sad that I missed the original party. Based on its success, Hewson improved and re-released Paradroid multiple times in the 1980s and early 90s. The competition edition arrived in 1986, featuring faster scrolling and optimized gameplay. Heavy Metal Paradroid followed in 1989 as a budget title, and the game was ported to the Amiga in 1990 as Paradroid 90. Community interest carried on into the 2000s, keeping the game alive for a new generation. Paradroid Redux, released by fans in 2007 for Windows and Linux, is generally considered the definitive modern version. For purists, the original remains accessible via the C64 Mini or Maxi and through emulators, letting players experience it in its intended PAL format. 40 years on, Paradroid is remembered not just as a great game, but as a design milestone. It's a shoot-'em-up that thinks, a puzzle game that moves fast, and a strategy challenge that keeps you sweating. Its clever transfer mechanics and risk-reward gameplay influenced generations of developers, proving that 64K RAM need not be a limiting factor if you have the technical prowess. Even without an official US release, its brilliance survived through emulators, fan patches, and sheer reputation. In the end, Paradroid reminds us that sometimes the best heroes are robots, and occasionally they explode if you don't treat them right. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like or subscribing, and I'd love to hear your memories of Paradroid. Drop them in the comments. Hope to see you again.